Hi folks, welcome to my Bit Retro Journal. Today I'm going to be covering one of my favorite topics, which is operating systems. On my channel you've seen that I've covered operating systems by looking at comparing 80s machines, 90s machines, digging deeper into operating systems, how their kernel works, even how file caching works. So I really like operating systems, especially in the earlier part, from the 80s and 90s. But today what I want to do is talk more about what are my favorite operating systems throughout the decades from present, the 2020s, all the way going back to the wild, wild west of the 80s when, what an operating system wasn't even as clearly defined to new users, at least. You can see that I have my Time-based Sinclair 1000, which, I had a ZX81 as a kid. And, what was an operating system for? Was that an operating system? Did it have an operating system? And so I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit, but mostly what my favorite ones are. And I'm going to do this on my desktop because I don't have the hardware for it. I have a few, but I don't have a comprehensive list of machines with running those operating systems. And we're going to start with the 2020s. So let's do that. Okay, as you can see, I'm on my desktop and I'm running, I know this looks like I'm running Windows 98 with the classic motif, but this is Windows 7. If you do Windows 7 Professional 2009. So this is still one operating system that I'm using quite a bit, and it is, I will say this is still one of my favorite operating systems. Now, in 2020, I've also sort of slowly converted to, and I don't have it obviously running in Windows 7, but I do have sort of a little online emulation of it. This is not a non-working one. If you do that, it says coming soon. So this is really just HTML, JavaScript showing you, somebody was just playing around with it, trying to create that Windows 10 motif. And I've been using this a lot on many of my other machines, desktop, laptops, and I've gotten to really like it. Another operating system in the current, in the 2020s, obviously, is one that's been around for a long time, which is Linux. And I'm actually not going to include Linux as here. I have it booted up, or Unix is one of the ones to compare to some of the other ones I use, mainly because I don't use it as a modern operating system. I don't, for instance, I use it as a server mostly, like this. I SSH, or even back in the days, telnet it into it, and this is kind of how I use Linux. And so I don't use a desktop environment. I have used GNOME, but not very extensively. So I think it would be unfair for me to throw Linux in there when I don't really use it fully. Now, the operating system, the other operating system I do use a lot is I'll close this. Is the Mac OS. In fact, I have a MacBook in my office, and I've had a variant of that since 2010. And so that I will compare against Windows 10 and Windows 7. And I really don't like the Mac current. Well, I haven't really liked the OS X since it came out. This is not one of my favorites, but it just doesn't behave intuitively. I'll give you one example. A TextEdit, the notepad of the Mac, is a rich text editor. You actually have to dumb it down to make it a pure text editor. And then when you write a document in it and then you close it because you didn't want to save it, it actually asks you if you want to delete it. You can't just say, no, don't save it. And that's unintuitive because it's not a file yet. So deleting should be about deleting a file, not a document that you haven't saved yet. So that's very confusing. So, the Mac OS is just not one of my favorites, and I think one of the reasons I haven't gone to Windows 11 is because I've read that they wanted to add this, and I haven't really explored it too much. So, and then there's also that rule of like every other Windows. So I've done 7, skipped 8, done 10, skipping 11, and I've really followed that model throughout the history. So, it's a no for me on Mac OS X, and so. Currently, the two favorites, and I think I'm going to give them a tie. We're only midway through 2020s. Is Windows 10 and Windows 7, which I still use a lot for retro stuff. And you'll see why in a second when I go to the next decade. All right. So let's move on to the decade of the 2010s. So in 2010, again, I'm not going to cover the Mac OS X because it's the same as in the 2020s, and same with Linux. And so what we started with, at least what I started with in 2010, was Windows XP, and this is actually running as the virtual machine on my Windows 7 because it comes with a package where it's nicely integrated. And this is actually another reason I like Windows 7 is because I can also run Windows XP and even run some old devices that use XP device drivers. 16-bit software will run in here as well. So again, for retro stuff, I think that's why Windows 7 is a really good Windows operating system, and it's still tied for me in 2020. In 2010, though, it was kind of that same battle between Windows XP, which I started off with in 10, and then around 213, 214, I upgraded to Windows 7. And speaking of this, I think this is like the classic of the Windows 98 motif. I even did my XP the same way, so I just have liked this motif consistently. But what's interesting, and this was also true for Windows 10, is that every version of Windows does this a little differently. So if you go Properties, Hardware, Device Manager, getting there is different. So now I'm here, but you get that same dialogue, and then with Windows 7, it's slightly different. Properties, Device Manager, but in the end, you get to the same Device Manager. And again, if I went back to Windows 10, unfortunately, this little demo doesn't do it. But if you did a right click, you'd get a large menu like this with links on it. And then eventually you'll get this dialog box. So it's a little frustrating that Windows, as it progresses, keeps giving you the same thing but in different ways. And so I wish they would keep that a little bit more the same. Fundamentally, that's why I think these operating systems haven't really changed that much. I know Windows 8 tried to change things a lot, and I definitely skipped Windows 8 in the 2010 era. Used XP a lot, and then moved to Windows 7. So for 2010, I would say Windows 7 ended up being the top favorite, and with XP sort of hanging on in the background. Okay, let's move on to the 2000s, it'll start getting a little crazier. All right, in 2000, what did we have in 2000? Well, you had a lot of different operating systems. The one I actually started with was the Macintosh System 7.5. It was right at the tail end of it, and one of my favorite operating systems. This is when I thought Mac did it kind of the right way. TextEdit actually worked the way it was supposed to, and not. I don't even know where I have it. I think I might have one in the system folder, or you can just open up it. You can open a TextEdit file. But yeah, TextEdit was a text editor, And if I wanted to quit it, it says don't save, not delete. So yeah, this was again one of my favorite operating systems, and I started at the beginning of 2000s, but it didn't last long because soon thereafter I moved from my Mac 2SI to a laptop, and for that I quickly moved to Windows 98. And I've shown this on my channel before. I have a IBM ThinkPad 365 XD, and that was, and I actually even emulated Basilisk, so my Mac on it. And let's see if this, yeah. So so this is actually an emulated one. Let's see if this will actually, it's a little slow. It'll open up. So this was my main machine until the mid to later part of the 2000s, and I eventually moved to XP at the later end of it. So let's bring back XP. Oops, I need to escape out of this. So XP ended up being, I couldn't put it on all the machines, but I think I got a more powerful laptop in the middle of the 2000s. So I moved to XP then. And there was also Vista, but again, Vista, I had to use it at work, but I did skip Vista because it was not a good operating system. So again, the 2000s were actually my favorite decade because all the operating systems I used from System 7.5 to Windows 98 and then moving to XP were actually really, I enjoyed using all of them. But XP sort of won for me in the 2000s because I used it for the majority towards the end, and it really was really tied to what laptop I had, and I had a couple of good laptops at the end of 2000. All right, so time to move to the crazy 90s. All right, here we go. Okay, the 90s. Yeah, things get a little crazier. Now, I'll talk about Unix because I didn't use Linux in the 90s, and I did use Unix quite a lot, but again, very similar to whatever I showed. I would log into either a school or a work server and got to know Emacs or Unimax pretty well in the late 80s. And with Emacs, you could actually emulate sort of Windows by splitting Windows in half. And so I used Unix quite a bit. But again, it's kind of a secondary operating system for me. Then what about the Windows side of things? Well, first of all, there was MS-DOS was actually still prevalent. I do have a server here that's MS-DOS. So, right, good old MS-DOS, and did use that at work quite a bit, and with various things. In fact, and I don't have it here, unfortunately, but I used the gem operating system that comes with the Atari it was installed on one of our DOS machines. It was the dumbed down version, and what I'll do is I'll throw a picture in what it looks like. But yeah, it was kind of a dumbed down version because of the suit with Apple. But and, I have shown gem on an Atari before here, and it wasn't my favorite just because of the color palette and whatnot. And the fact that the Atari lacked multitasking, but still, it wasn't bad. And on the Windows machine, it was just kind of interesting to see. And then, of course, we had Windows 3.1, which I do have here. Yep, and that I did. Oops, let me make sure I can get in here. Yeah, that I actually had to install on. Like a couple of Windows desktop, MS-DOS desktop machines. And in fact, I think towards the latter part of the 90s, I actually installed it on my Mac under soft Windows. So, and I remember having the background would be my, the leaf, there was the leaf pattern that would look like a leafy background was, and I forget how to do it, otherwise I would do it here. Can you do it here as a desktop? Yeah, it's been a while since I've used it, but they do have Paintbrush and Notepad, so some of my favorite apps. But I don't know how to, is it under main, control panel? Can you do the desktop? Oh, here it goes. Maybe you can do the desktop. Is there a desktop pattern? Edit pattern. Yeah, there's none here. So you could, you'd have the leaf pattern. You could sort of close. You could have that, and then sort of the idea of having a background other than just a color was kind of a novelty in Windows. And then Windows 95, which I didn't do an emulator for Windows 95, but it wasn't really that much different from Windows 98, and I never really used it. And then, of course, in the 90s, at the very beginning of the 90s, I started off with QDOS, and one of my favorite operating systems. And this, has it uses the mouse instead of an actual mouse. Although you could, I did show you on my channel mice, which had mouse attached to it. But the using the arrow keys reminds me a lot of my ThinkPad's little red nubby that it has. Kind of works the same way. But yeah, so this was kind of a fun operating system, and I really liked it because it's also multitasking, has a nice kernel. This was my first one in the 90s. I used it from 1990 to about 92. exclusively, and then throughout the 90s, sort of secondary, because again, the Mac OS was the main one that I used, and to me, I went from System 6 to System 7, and then eventually I think this is System 7.5. And this was it. But to me, I never moved up to Windows 8, and I used this all the way through the end of the 90s. And this is actually a snapshot of my hard disk, and did a lot of programming on it, as I've also demonstrated. I think I had Think C. Where is it? Yeah. Is that, yeah? So here's the Think C compilation system, and then you create a new project, desktop, ABC, and you could just, for me, if I could write programs, that was really one of the important things. So yeah, for the 1990s, the Mac System 7.5 Mac OS was my top operating system. All right, well, we'll get to the final part now, which is the 1980s. Yep, I call this the wild, wild west of operating systems because, I mean, it was a crazy time. I got my QL at the tail end of the 80s, maybe November of 89. So I don't even remember using, I think the way I used it was not in this, I didn't have a graphical interface. I think I kind of used it more as a there's different ways you can use the QL, and you can make it look just like a basic, a Commodore 64 if you want. 10, print, hello, 20, go to 10. And I think this is how I used it, so I'm not going to even include it in here. And I think it was until the 90s that I really started to explore the operating system that QDOS was. But the list is long here, so if I went backwards, obviously, again, using Unix at school a lot, so we're back to this sort of environment. And again, Linux and Unix are sort of interchangeable to me, even though the kernels are different. And then, of course, also at school, I had access to MS-DOS. And I didn't in school have access, and I don't recall in the 80s getting much access to the Macintosh environment. And if it were, it wouldn't be this. It would have been sort of the black and white environment that you got, as opposed to this color palette one. So the much more primitive version of the Mac. Close it. What else did I have? So QDOS, we had MS-DOS, Unix, Prime OS. I don't have anything to show you Prime OS, but it was an operating system that looked similar to like a Linux or DOS environment. It was a mini computer environment, multi-user. It used things like CATA for directory. It stood for catalog. But in the 80s, for about a year, I also got to use this machine, the Amiga, and had a lot of fun with it. One of my roommates or suite mates had an Amiga, and he let us all use it, and it was just terrific to be able to get your hands on it, and a lot of fun. And so I really got a chance to, first time to experience, what is a graphical interface, because I know the Macs came out, but I didn't really have access. Maybe I saw one once, but this was the first time I had an opportunity to actually play games on it and poke around with it, and really got to understand what an operating system could be. And so that was my first exposure to that. Put that aside, and then of course we're going all the way back to also had the ZX81, right? That was my first computer that I had, maybe from 82 to about 84, 85. That didn't really have a disk in it, so you didn't have a disk operating system. And then one of the other ones, the first ones I was exposed to was, I've done a bunch of videos on my channel on that, was the TRS-80 Model 3. And again, didn't own one, but I did used to go to Radio Shack after school all the time, and yeah, would play with it. And, you had to start a game, so you kind of had to learn how to do a directory command and then be able to start the game. And so, I think it was a Model 1. So this was kind of my first exposure to a personal computer, and that it had some sort of way to navigate an operating system. And then this was my second one, which kind of got rid of that idea. And then this brought it all back, but in such a sophisticated way, along with obviously MS-DOS and Linux. And so, yeah, I think that's why to me the 80s was the Wild Wild West, because it was all over the place. And having to choose between these, I think I'm going to choose the Amiga as the winner, because it was really even though, again, the QL came out in 84 and ICE came out in 85, I had no idea of any of that stuff until the late 89 when I bought the QL. But the Atari existed with GEM, and the Macintosh obviously was proliferating through, but I just didn't have access to those. This is the machine I had access to, and so this, I have to say, really opened my eyes to what an operating system could be, and probably used the Time Sinclair 1000 the longest, but considering all the, as a programming machine, it was great, but it's hard to call this an operating system. But if I look at MS-DOS and Unix and Amiga, it kind of gives you that feel, especially with its multitasking. And so that's been my journey of operating systems, and I wanted to share that with you. I hope you enjoyed this, and share with me what some of your favorite operating systems were throughout the decades. In any case, I'm going to end here. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.